Welcome back, my beautiful humans, to another episode of If I Die Tomorrow, the podcast that confronts our mortality to help us live a more meaningful life today. I'm your host, Nicole, and last week we delved into the pages of sacred texts to understand who God is according to religious doctrine. We explored the divine as a creator, as the one and only, and as the ultimate reality, a Brahman. We challenged ourselves to consider how those timeless views might actually shape our lives. And again, touching on them last week, I know I did not do all of them justice. There is so much more to explore and understand and really get a grasp on. And eventually I might break it down further to understand each one. But again, this is as your challenge was last week, was to actually pick one of those and start doing some research and getting your own understanding, making your own choices, and finding what resonates with you in here when you discuss God and how you believe. I'm going to take a different path, and you knew I was going to do this because I said this was going to be a multi-part. So the different path that we're going to take today, we're stepping outside of the temple, outside of the books and texts, and we are asking a new question. Who does the world say God is? And there's a lot of answers out there. There's a lot of opinions. There is a lot of people who feel that their view is the only view. And then there are some that just don't believe at all. And we all have a right to decide what we let enter into our hearts and into our heads. And asking who the world thinks God is, or who the world says God is, outside of the text, outside of the books. It's about people. You, me. It's about culture, history, and even science. It's about how the concept of God has been shaped and reshaped by society. You know it has been. I know it has been. We've come a long way. When you look at history, you see a fascinating evolution. The earliest concepts of the divine were often tied to nature. And we had polytheism and the belief in many gods and goddesses. Think of the ancient Greeks with Zeus and Jupiter, and the Roman pantheons, where deities like Medusa and Neptune, they ruled over all of us, and specific aspects of our life for each one, but the big one always was Zeus, right? If there was a hierarchy, I guess. I don't understand all of it. But focused on different areas of our lives, like the sky, the sea, war, and love. And these gods were very human-like. They had flaws and rivalries and passions, including jealousy, and some of them had anger issues. Some of them were narcissists, if you look back and break it down. So they weren't abstract concepts. They were forces you had to appease or reckon with. The view of God was a way for people to explain the natural world and their place in it, which is very true. But it also shows that, we're willing to be open to giving some of that away. Over time, we shifted from polytheism with multiple gods and deities to a rise of monotheistic faiths brought a singular, all-powerful God. And he started to be talked about, addressed, and understood as Zeus and Aphrodite and Neptune, and all of them started to fall to the wayside. The world's perception of God has varied dramatically. Consider the Age of Enlightenment in Europe. Thinkers began to challenge religious dogma and emphasize reason and logic. This era saw the rise of deism and the belief that God created the universe but does not interfere with it. In this view, God is a divine watchmaker who built a perfect, self-sustaining universe and then stepped back through his hands and said, Yan yon. I personally don't believe that. I believe he gave us free will. But I don't ever think he just, yan yon. I don't think he did that. And I think that this response to a world increasingly explained by science, where the miracles in the past seemed less necessary. I believe that miracles exist. I believe that it's hard to appreciate and understand them because we do want to explain everything. But it's also made me personally understand that sometimes the why isn't necessary. It's not necessary for me to believe. It's not necessary for me to move on with my life for certain whys. It doesn't have a place. I mean, there are instances when, yes, a why would be nice, but it's not necessary. And coming to terms with that was really difficult, because I think as humans, we all believe that somehow we deserve an explanation for things. And if we don't have one, we make one up, or we put something out there to give us some peace and rest. And I think we do that with miracles and with things we don't understand, and in turn with God. I also believe that there are a lot of things religious-wise that haven't been shared with us, that they are hidden and locked away, hoping for the right time. And I can understand where people get upset with religion, and so they decide they're just not going to believe at all. And it makes me sad because there's always something bigger than ourselves working somewhere. And whether you want to call it God or not, I think deep down we all have that. And we also, some of us, it's easier to believe in coincidences and fate, things that we do not see, but are easier to explain than to um, have or have be able to say that they have a belief in a creator or God or the Holy Trinity of God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Yet those people also do have belief in angels, and I think it's their one step in. um and I think any step towards an understanding outside of ourselves is a beautiful thing. And now, seeing as how I just kind of went off on a small tangent. You've been with me long enough, you know what's going to happen. Um, so as we briefly touched on the age of enlightenment, I'm also so now when we get into the 20th and 21st century, um, with a lot of rapid advancements in science and technology. I mean, look, we got AI, doing jobs. That's a whole nother issue and the whole nother subject. And I will totally lose everything as far as the subject at hand. So I'm going to stick to that, and at another time we can discuss that if you'd like to. Um, but because we have had so many advancements in science and technology, it's also brought a lot of new questions to the table. And so we have atheism and the belief that God does not exist at all. That he just doesn't. Or they choose to. I don't actually. I'm not an atheist. Um, my understanding of atheism is that there is no God. Um, and then there's the agnosticism, and that's the view that the existence of God is unknowable. Many people in the world today see the universe as a product of natural processes, like the Big Bang Theory and evolution, without the need for a supernatural creator. They just want to stick to those things. Science offers a very powerful, verifiable narrative for how the world works. And for many, that narrative is enough. But the concept of God in the world isn't just about belief or non belief, it's also about a cultural image. Think about the common depictions you see in movies and art. I will tell you a very good series that I watched is The Chosen. Um, and I think a lot of the portrayal is beautiful. I also think, though, that because with TV, you have to add things. Um, but I also think that certain things were removed. Um, and I still think that some of the hidden texts um, are just that. They're still hidden, and hopefully one day we will get to see them and we will discern what is right, because it was religion that chose what books we saw from the writings that were found. Now, when I talk about the cultural differences, the There is the wise old man with a long beard, the disembodied voices from the heavens. These images have been burned into our collective consciousness, shaping how we think about the divine, even if we don't realize it. It's there. It's subconsciously put into our brains. And so I think a lot of us, I mean, there's even, the hippie. um, eh, all to fit our different personalities, I believe, on what we're okay with accepting. But they are a product of cultural storytelling. It's not religious texts. The world also presents God in the context of social and political movements. God has been invoked to justify wars, to fight for civil rights, and to inspire acts of charity. In these cases, the concept of God becomes a powerful tool, a symbol for a cause. God is not just a deity, he's a representation of justice, freedom, or authority. The world has created a version of God in its own image for its own purposes. And we know in religious text it is God created us in his image. And as a society, we have tried to change that so that he fits what we feel. So what does all of this mean to us and for us and our premise of if I die tomorrow? It means that the way the world talks about God is a reflection of its values, its fears, and its knowledge. And all of this applies at any given time in your day-to-day life, in this very second, in this very question. All of those things can be very confusing and overwhelming as we are bombarded with different versions of the divine. From the wrath-like God of fire and brimstone preachers to the distant deities, deities, creator, to the abstract, impersonal force of the universe itself. It's easy to get lost in all of that noise. And we are bombarded every day with all kinds of noise, and sometimes it's to make us forget who we are here, what we feel. But that's the point. Before we can figure out what we believe, what you believe, what I believe, individually, we have to understand the landscape. We have to recognize that the image of God we hold in our minds might be only a product of a movie we saw or a cultural trend. Do you remember for a long time there was a cultural trend that it was, what would Jesus do? And they had the bracelets and everything, and it was an amazing movement. And then, like every other fad, it just kind of faded. Some of those, though, it invoked something. They, heard a proverbial knock on their heart and changed and began to view God in a different way. I know that I presented a lot of information here, and we recognize that we are the ones that actually choose to believe who and what God is and represents to us individually. But the only way to live authentically is to cut through all of the noise. I want you to pay attention this week to how the world around you talks about God. If in your world at all talks about God. Listen to the songs, watch movies, read the news. Ask yourself, what version of God is being presented here? Is it a judge? Is it a friend? An inspiration? Or an irrelevant myth? Think about how those external perceptions influence your own beliefs and how they might be stopping you from living your most authentic life. And as you do that, pay attention to not just what you see, what you hear. Pay attention to how you feel when you see and you hear. It might help you cut through some of the noise. And it might take away some of the anxiety because it can be overwhelming. Next week, we'll finish the series with the most important episode of all, who I say God is. And it's not just going to be my beliefs, but yours. Again, it's an open conversation to a landscape of knowledge and feeling to form your own beliefs. Because there are many who can quote scripture and yet live a horrible life. And there are many who know very few scriptures and want you to live better than what they do or they present. And you have to be careful, and your discernment needs to be there. And we will talk about part of that in next week when we talk about who I say God is. And I can't wait for you to join me. We will put aside the texts and the world's opinions, and we're going to ask ourselves to look inside and to listen and to feel and to believe. Because again, we don't always see everything, but we know it's there. For now, listen, observe, and challenge the stories that you've been told. And as you do that, gain confidence and strength in your own discernment and values. Until next time, be kind, be grateful, stay humble.